Oh, hey there. Yeah, it's Justin again. Justin here at the Inner Fellowship of Men, Angels, and Spirits, here with another quick message that probably won't be quick, but you know, that is what I do, right? So what's going on? What's happening out there? Huh? Looks like well, quite a lot is happening, especially if you look at America, but this is obviously something that affects the world. We have a new president. And in the first 2 weeks of his presidency, he has seen fit to basically threaten his allies, attempt to evacuate the country of all illegals, and now he seems to want to, I guess, turn Gaza into prime real estate. I don't know. I mean, a lot of strange things are happening. And I know that I've been hearing that people who opposed him originally, didn't vote for him, they felt as though for a season it would be best just to say nothing, do nothing, just watch it happen. And when it all goes bad, then they can just say, "Well, this is what you asked for. This is what you voted for." And in a way, I think I did originally send out a message that God told Lucifer to do as he wills, to let him do as he. God actually told Gabriel to let Lucifer do as he wills, and kind of use that as maybe a signal that that's what we should do. We should just hang back, let the bad things happen, and then point out how bad those things are, and hopefully after that things will be better. And even if they don't get better, well, at least we'll be right. But that's not exactly what I was getting at. Okay, so you have a president who is talking about annexing Canada and taking back the Panama Canal. He's renaming bays and gulfs. He's talking about purchasing other sovereign nations. This kind of thing, it's not something that you just sit back and watch, right? So you're going to feel that pull to take it out to the streets, because and I can understand that pull, because basically we have a president who has what would seem to be absolute power, now that a Supreme Court has said that he's immune from having done anything wrong, if it is, or it can be argued to be, in the capacity as the president. We used to have the system of checks and balances where he would bring in his cabinet, and then the Congress would have to basically vote upon whether that cabinet was qualified, and then that cabinet could function as his assistant. Now he seems to be able to just create a department, and have someone who was not elected and someone who had not been vetted by the Congress or by any intelligence agency, no security clearances or anything like that, and just hands over the keys to the kingdom to this guy. That would be Elon Musk. That seems to be a big problem. I mean, if you really think about it, when you start to wield power in such a way that you do things that are not legal, and yet with a sort of lack of care for legality, that even if a court were to say, "Hey, you should stop that," you can just keep going, and then what's the court going to do about it? Because they can only send a marshal who is controlled by you to enforce what they say. So we have a president who seems to have the will and disposition to disregard the law, and we have given him the power to do that. And when your very leader of the most powerful nation, arguably, not arguably, the most powerful nation on the planet that we can see, begins to flaunt the law, well, then you end up in a nation of lawlessness. It becomes a question of why anybody should follow laws. And that's the challenge that we're faced with. Okay, so we're going to see that pull, we're going to feel that pull to do something about this, or if you are, you like what's going on, that pull to support it. And either way, that's probably going to happen on the streets. I don't think it's something that the government can correct at this point, unless there are some extremely courageous people who are willing to stand up and very potentially wreck their lives to make sure that this does not go full head. But that's not why I'm here. Why I'm here is to address the question of, why is all of this happening? I mean, from a spiritual standpoint, why is this happening? I keep my goals spiritual. They're not primarily political, although politics seems to be a prime way of indicating spiritual points that need to be understood. But yeah, this is not good. So why is it happening? Well, I think from just the historian's perspective, we would be able to say, hey, listen, civilizations rise and civilizations fall. And one indicator of how they rise and fall is, the sort of development of civility and comity among a certain society, and then the loss of that civility and comity amongst that society. And that's what it seems like we're seeing here. There seems to be we're losing our sense of civility. We're losing our sense of lawfulness. That the order that we have put in place in order to take care of ourselves and each other is no longer something that should be upheld. Okay, so yeah, we could just say, yeah, civilizations rise, civilizations fall. So, okay, America or even the Western civilization just happens to be falling, just like Rome, just like Egypt, right? But that's not really where I go with this. Even if you think it's true, I feel like we need to put things into a greater perspective. And that's where I'm going. I want to put this into perspective. You know, a lot of this is happening because people argue over when life began. I think I can settle that argument. Life began in the primordial ooze, billions and billions of years ago on this planet. And it has not ceased since. Life began as a germ that formed into a cell that evolved into a multicellular organism that evolved into the organs of other organisms. Those organisms in the primordial ooze then began to be swimming creatures that then developed the ability to walk on land and breathe the air. And then those creatures develop the ability to grow fur, to reproduce in more flexible and useful ways. They have developed into, I don't know, lemurs, mammals, right? Developed into apes, monkeys, and yes, even mankind. And from that perspective, I think it needs to be understood that even though all those things happened over such a long period of time, every stage of our evolution continues to exist on this world today. Every stage. And not only is every stage of our evolution continuing to exist on this earth on this day, but the consciousness or the level of consciousness associated with that stage of evolution also exists on this world to this day. So there was a time in the past when there were monsters. And there was the consciousness of a monster that existed on this planet and continues to exist, even though we don't necessarily see the monsters such as they were millions of years ago. All of it exists to this day. And most of it exists within you. Now, of course, I speak of that not just scientifically as to say that your body is composed of germs that make cells, that make organs, that make organisms, that is you, but also that all those levels of consciousness associated with those variegated phases of our physical existence, they also exist to this day. And I've said in the past that it's not so much that something is evil because of what it is, but really it's evil because of where it is. It's in the wrong place. It's not functioning in the way that it should. Lions should roar. That's a warning to other animals. And of course, lions should hunt and kill because they're lions, and that's how they eat. And there's that part of us, that part within us, that lion within us that has a place and a purpose for roaring, hunting, and killing, even. And it happens that as we develop, let's say intellectually, of course, there's much more complexity to it than just intellect, but as we develop intellectually to the point that we can make moral decisions, well, before then, we're almost entirely controlled, entirely dominated by our environment, whether that be internal or external. Easy to control. Seems chaotic, but no, completely dominated by the environment and internal drives like hunger or the desire for sex or the craving for comfort, warmth, shelter. All of those things drive us in such a way that every one of us, or every animal, let's say, would do exactly the same thing under the influence of those drives and under the influence of the environment that they are in. They are not distinguishable from each other because they make the same decisions, which is no decision at all, really. It's entirely determined by internal and external environs. But it is when we begin to make moral decisions, that's when we start to establish ourselves as something that is a thing apart from the environment, not completely separate, but not one and the same, and not entirely bound to it. And it's when that happens that spirits rush in. Because then is our potential for spirituality. What are these spirits? Well, some of these spirits are personalities. But regardless of what these spirits are, what we can say is they are the impetus to do something that is not entirely determined by one's natural disposition and one's environment. It empowers us to change, to be free from antecedent causation. And when we do that, that's when we begin to formulate our ideas of that which is supernatural. Well, we probably call it ghosts at first because our primary fear until that point is death. And then what survives death other than a ghost? And we might believe that these ghosts are now controlling us even more than our hunger and even more than the natural environment. There is this supernatural control and influence over us. Okay, so we go from ghosts. As we evolve our concept of this supernatural reality. And we end up with some semblance of a god. You might call it a god, or you might call it a spirit, or spirits. Obviously, every tribe and every primordial civilization is going to develop its own concept of what this supernatural being is, which is why we end up with multiple gods as these tribes come together, presenting their own ideas of what their deity is, and obviously having a notion that there must be a deity for everything that happens. Then you're going to have multiple gods. And then that's what happens. You have multiple gods, and that's pretty much where we get to when the real God, who created all of this, sends in the spirits that start promoting something that is supernatural, something that we wouldn't just naturally evolve. That's where we get revelation. Revelation not in the form of books we couldn't read, right? Revelation probably not even at first in the form of language. Maybe we couldn't speak so precisely. But obviously those symbolisms, those concepts that bring us to a higher place and a higher level of understanding where we can begin to reckon the world in a way that allows us to be controlled by higher impulses than just what our physical being and our physical surroundings would suggest. That's when we become civilizing. We begin to start to think about what is good to do and what is bad to do, not just what our environment tells us to do. Because we begin to function more cohesively in growing numbers because we begin to establish these understandings of what it's good to do, what it's good to say, what is right, what is wrong, and we enforce it because we are so strongly aware of the supernatural power behind it. Now, we're not aware in a way that we can articulate in a Bible or in a Quran, but we are aware of the immensity of this supernatural power over us, so much so that we enforce it. And that's where you get civilization, with the notion of laws and the enforcement of laws. And in addition to that, the surety, the certainty that those laws are upheld by something divine, and therefore we should treat it with such solemnity that we don't break them. We don't dare break them. And not only do we not dare break them, but we harshly prosecute those who do. And so, long story short, and it is a long story, and I am making it short, we end up with society as we have it today. So successful in its civilizing aspect that it is able to create almost an entirely man-made artificial environment around itself. So much so that it kind of subconsciouses what was primarily conscious as a motivation for following the rules, for obeying the laws. We were so meaningfully moved to obey these laws upheld by the unseen and the divine when we couldn't see much, or rather perhaps we could see more then because there was not much that existed that we hadn't created. But now we have created so much, I should properly say, we have co-created so much that there's very little around us that we didn't create. And so we begin to think that we have created everything, even those laws. And that if we have created those laws, then we are at liberty to change them any way we want, and we are at liberty to break them whenever we have the power to do so. That's what happens when we get to a point of civilization where we think we're the ones in charge. Okay, so that's where Jesus came in. He came into a world who thought that even though they on the surface made everything about religion, the Romans, the Jews, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, they all made everything about religion, but more and more were they aware that this was something that was made by them and that they were upholding, and that they could just use God as a useful tool to give them the power to uphold it. Jesus was crucified on this thing that happens with us. He was crucified because the Jews believed that the laws that they had made were made by them, but yet they could use the authority of God to uphold them, so that when he broke them for righteous reasons, well, they could have him killed. And the Romans had no problem doing that because they were subject to their own laws, so that they were conscious of having been made by no more than them. And so we saw in the Bible that Jesus did warn that, of course, this civilization was going to fall. Not only the Roman civilization, but even the Jewish temples, and that they would basically be forsaking that thing that they thought they were chosen for, to inherit this earth, to be the rulers of this earth. They had forsaken that because they failed to acknowledge that spirit that pushed us to get to this point. And when you get to such a point of comfort, you think it's just about you and what you made up and how you keep it going, or you have control over it. Of course, with civilization, there is the need for us to first and foremost control ourselves, but in the absence of that, the need to control each other. That's where these laws come from. And that's why they are enforced such as they are. And that enforcement was, in fact, how Jesus was crucified. I'm not going to get into some kind of religious debate about whether or not he was supposed to be crucified. Only I can say that we were at such a state of civilization and so-called civility that we could justify killing him based on God's laws, which were really, of course, ours, and we were conscious of them of really being no more than ours. We weren't being guided by his spirit, not the spirit of his laws, no, but by the letter. Letters we created, letters we wrote down, and letters that keep us in control. And when we get to that level of civilization, our control trumps God's will. Our ability to control what happens in this world becomes more important than what God wants for us in eternity. So why am I telling you this? Well, obviously, because it's happening now. It's happening again, but it's always happening. It's always happening. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall. And every time they rise, they believe they are blessed by God. And as they fall, it's an apocalypse, the end times. And there have been many apocalypses. It's not, I know, I understand it's not a Latin word. But anyway, and there are many apocalypses, and there have been many end times, beginning of ages and sub-ages and eras and periods and things like that, where powers rise to power, seem to expand across the entire world, and then they quite expeditiously collapse and contract. Seems like that's what America's on the precipice of. You see, America, like all nations, is divinely led in the ways of its people, so that it could achieve the best results, the most divine outcomes. But in our leadership, our divine leadership, we began to assume it was a thing unreal. Religion began to be something that merely used it as an excuse to do what people wanted to do. The laws, the oaths, the vows people take to God don't mean much, just a useful tool to get what you want. You begin to see the loopholes in the letter of the law and completely ignore the spirit of the law. That's happening not just in America, that's happening in the world. But it's going to have a worldwide impact because of what's happening in America. And like I said, as that begins to happen, as things begin to fall into what appears to be lawlessness, because all of the standards and norms that had previously been followed because it was believed that they were upheld by God are now understood to be something that is just created by those people. And now we need to change it. Doesn't matter if those people are the deep state or if those people are the actual state or if those people are religious leaders. Doesn't really matter. We begin to believe that we don't have to follow those laws. We can create our own laws, and that maybe the outcomes that we want are more important than the loyalty to the spirit of the laws that we have created or co-created. So again, you're going to feel this pull. You're going to feel this pull to join the fight for control. You might feel like you're being pulled to uphold this law, and possibly even because it is God's law. You might see it as a religious pursuit. And I'm not going to say that this message is for everyone. Most will succumb to that pull. That's just probably what we are meant to do at this stage of our existence. There's going to be protests, probably going to be riots. There's going to be civil incursions, let's call them. There's going to be wars. And I don't think there's any stopping that. And in fact, I feel like the message of the day is it will be primarily exacerbated by those who think their purpose is to stop it or to control it, to make it not happen, to make something better happen, and what have you. And that's fine. Maybe it is their purpose to do that. But if you are interested in the inner fellowship of men, a name that I've coined, which was previously and probably should still be called the kingdom of God, because of course, God is at the center of it, not men. Your priorities have to be different. Because as I have said in the past, your priorities cannot be beating the other side. Your priorities have to be closeness to God. That's the only way into the kingdom. The only way in is sincerity. The only way in is with love and compassion for your fellow man. You can't fight something to get into the pearly gates, the so-called pearly gates. And the only evidence is that you are in the kingdom is your, I don't want to say unwillingness to fight, but your willingness to fight in a more spiritual way and a less animalistic way, we'll put it that way, with violence or with social pressure to win a social war about the rules that you've made for yourself and for no other, and with none other in mind. Certainly not God. Yeah, that most people are going to do that, and you're going to watch most people doing that. But if you're someone watching this video, if you're part of the inner fellowship of men, angels, and spirits, I implore you to consider what it is. It is a conspiracy of spirits to move man to a higher state of being. And it does so primarily by doing so. That is to say that it inspires men to do better by doing better, not by doing your worst to fight someone that you think is worse than you. Now, how do you resist the temptation to fight someone that you think is worse than you when the most powerful nation has been basically taken over by the smallest man due to the smallness in the hearts of so many in that nation? You might feel very much concerned with that. I certainly am. But what I usually do is take that concern to God. Make it God's concern. Make that a spiritual experience and not just a political one, or even a philosophical one, or an ideological one. Take it to God. You take it to God and you're not alone. And you don't need to join some group that you know you have to lie to yourself about some of the things that they do and believe being just. Because you see, when you enter into the inner fellowship of men, angels, and spirits, when you enter into the kingdom of God, you will be disappointed if you think it's a war in heaven that you're engaged in that's fought with swords and shields. It is not. What you will find is your unseen sisters. I call them sisters because we would be more like a masculine version of them, and they would be more like a feminine version of us. Some people call them angels, some people call them seraphim, but your sisters, your unseen sisters, who constitute what we can know of the superhuman administration of this planet, well, they go by names including words like brotherhood, garden, peace, mercy, compassion. You see, the war in heaven, so to speak, is the war to bring more and more of these experiences into your heart. These senses of being filial, of being united into your heart. Now, they are working from the outside to do that. They are sort of your external spiritual environment. And in just the same way that your external physical environment could influence you, so do they. As an animal, external physical environment seems to control you. Well, likewise, external spiritual environments, they don't control us because we have personalities, but they influence us greatly if we open up to those influences. If we stay closed to those, then we'll be open up to lower influences, and there you are out there attacking the Capitol, right? But the greatest force that's working for you in this inner fellowship is the indwelling spirit of God, the spirit that dwells within you. That is a fragment of God himself personally. They don't even know him. They watch you find out what he does. That spirit can guide you to all truth. And well, let's just call that your internal environment from a spiritual perspective. So just like an animal has external controls and internal controls, the organs, the hungers, the drives, well, from a spiritual level, you will be increasingly influenced by higher spiritual environments from the external and the internal. The internal being the indwelling spirit of God. This is God himself, but not in person, but God in your person and as your person. So essentially, the highest possible version of yourself that can be. That's what this spirit is, or is seeking to be in time and through space and through these events. So I hope that you're beginning to see that in the kingdom, in the inner fellowship of men, angels, and spirits, boy, this is a tremendous opportunity. There's no better time than now for you to make those decisions, those courageous decisions to identify with the indwelling spirit rather than to degrade into animal-like tendencies. Because you see those other civilizations that rose and then fell, Well, they fell because they got so comfortable with their own creation that they devolved into their own animalistic tendencies that were out of place and out of order. And yeah, their laws became useless and basically moot. They fell to lawlessness, and soon they were overrun by utter lawlessness. It wasn't because a different race came in that was worse than them that destroyed it. No, it was because they were no longer living by the values that would have guided those other races to a better place of being. They were dominated by their fear, their animal fear from back when they were in the forest. And they turned their civilization back into a forest. Now, you may be surrounded by people who are doing just that. You may be noticing that they're doing just that. But at the same time, you should be noticing that there's a new sense of God's presence these days. Yeah, it may be unconsciously being acted out by this sort of superficial religiosity by evangelicals, so to speak, who think that now is the time to stop people from having abortions, or now is the time to, yeah, uphold Christian values, which is just as much, if not more, the tendencies of Occidental people as it ever was the ways of Jesus. Yeah, there are going to be people who are going to experience this presence as a new call to violently uphold what they believe and to hold on to their opinions such that they can't know anything more or better. You're going to see people react to it that way. And there's a place and a purpose for that. I hope it's not yours, though. I hope that it rather inspires you and motivates you to further your ascension to God, to try to use this opportunity, this tremendous opportunity, this crisis being circle making decisions that bring you closer to God or take you farther away. I hope you take this decision to make yourself closer to God. Do more what Jesus would do and less what you see so many others doing as they panic because they just can't imagine anything more than this world. They can't imagine any authority higher than the laws that they made and that they uphold or not. I promise you this, while you may be disappointed that these angels or these seraphim are more concerned with making you what you would call soft or woke than fighting a war in the way that you consider wars to be fought, they will surely succeed. And I am so certain of this because they are not only ably assisted, but they are ably led by the presence of God that exists within you, which means, in many ways, they are looking to you for their marching orders. Of course, not you as you are conscious of being, but you as you shall become if you continue this journey. If you continue this journey inward and upward to God, and instead of just running outward and downward to fight, I guarantee you, you will discover a power that is immense, more immense than death. So immense that it probably won't even matter to you that this little government you have is not doing what you want it to do, and that you feel like everything that you gained, that it was you that was gaining, might be lost, and so it needs to be you that protects it. No, you will begin to find a power that organizes and orchestrates things on such a level that even the things that you think bad seem to have a divine purpose. And you might be able to put it into a place in your mind where it functions in a way that gives you peace and solemnity and trust because you may be beginning to see right now that trust is at issue. Well, you know, trust, there are seraphim who work to instill trust in you, to instill brotherhood in you, to instill mercy in you. And in the kingdom, if they are successful in doing that, even for just one decision that you've made, that is a triumph. No matter who is your physical leader. You remember that Jesus said, give to Caesar that which is Caesar's, give to God that which is God. It is this that he is talking about. You're going to hear lots of pundits talking about how there is a fight for the soul of America or for whatever country you're living in, that this is an existential crisis and this and that. I'm not saying they're wrong. What I'm saying is fearing it on such ways and dragging yourself to such an animal level that you begin to look at your fellow man as the cause of those fears and concerns and then treat them that way, you're going to make it worse. You're going to assure that the existence that you think this is an existential crisis about is lost. And when I say lost, I don't mean lost to this world. I mean lost to eternity. I know you may not be able to fathom eternity, but let's just put it this way. It's longer than this life. This life is a second. It is meant to come, go, pass, just like an eggshell. You try to fight to stay within it, die. And so when we really talk about the rise and fall of humanity as an eternal reality, well, that has more to do with us pursuing divinity in our humble beginnings as we emerged from the forest, and then creating so much comfort around us in that pursuit that we begin to take that divinity for granted, or as something that just doesn't exist, or something that only exists to uphold what we think and believe. This is an opportunity of a lifetime to make choices that sort of engender what that man was saying when he said, even though he slay me, still do I love this God. He was experiencing the fact that having a relationship with this divine spirit is more important than this life. And this is why Jesus said, who that loses his life shall have it, but he who fights to save his life shall lose it. This is also why Jesus said, he who falls upon the rock shall have eternal life. But he who the rock falls upon, well, he's lost it. This is it, guys. This is it. I'm going to tell you right now, all of those apostles elevated themselves almost in an instant, not because they knew Jesus, but because when the troubles came, they did his will and not the will of the animals around them. Though it meant their life, they realized that this life was nothing compared to what they were going to. And having done that, they left a legacy that has led to the more peaceful and orderly world that we live in today, where we don't even try to have peace and order in our tribe, in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our towns, but we try to have peace and order on a worldwide scale. And though we fail, the notion that we think that we can, or we think that we should, or that we lament that we haven't, even though we've never come close to it ever in the past anyway. That is all evidence of God's presence increasingly in our lives, moving us to greater and greater things as a collective. But as an individual, we must not become so preoccupied with that we forsake the living spirit, that we can have a personal relationship in every moment. So what can you do? There's lots of practical things that you can do, but anything you do with that intent to bring God into your life and more meaningfully, anything you do with that intent works. I think it's a good idea to try to learn as much as you can about God. Learn first from the religion of your ancestors. Then try to learn from the religion of other ancestors. You'll start to see the thread that goes through them all. And in the process, you'll be faced with challenges like the ones we have today that will give you the opportunity to make a courageous decision or to make a scared decision. That will propel you even closer to God if you make the right choice. And you will make the right choice because you will be in constant conversation with God about what your choice should be. That's all we have. And just bear in mind that the closer you get to God, the more of a conscious conversation that you're having with God, where you function amiably with His Spirit, well, the more of these seraphim, your sisters, can rely on you to do their work. And that's when you start to talk about the power over heaven and earth. But we might get back on that a little bit more. I'll probably go into more detail with that. But the most important thing at this time is, as I said, when I started these videos, or this version of these videos, the only thing that's important that you need to be concerned with is the decision that you are making. What I'm basically saying is take every moment as an opportunity to talk to God about what's going on and to listen, to know the way that He is and try to be that way even then. Not just how He is on some superficial level, but deeply within you. Even your enemy is His child. So how are you going to be about it? How would God be about it? That's it. Remember. And as you draw near to those people who are desiring to do the same, I think you're going to find something very extraordinary happen. Things that you won't be able to tell anyone because they just wouldn't believe it. But you'll know. So I'll finish there. That's all for now. I'll see you on the other side, perhaps. On the other side of this conflict, on the other side of this life, or just on the other side of this video. Take care for now. God bless. And remember, you want to enter the kingdom. You don't want to be the one who's outside the kingdom thinking they're fighting for it. And that's the only thing that's keeping them out of it. See you next time. Bye for now.